It's rare for long-running franchises to bat 1,000 with every release. There are going to be some missteps in games in the series that are seen as disappointments. This can be for taking risks that didn't pay off or for deviating too far from what fans loved about the earlier titles. If we have to point at one game for the Hitman series that fits this description, it would be Hitman Absolution. Released in 2012, Hitman Absolution had the tall task of following up the beloved Hitman Blood Money. Fans were expecting an expansion of the sandbox gameplay. However, Absolution took a completely different approach that has left many fans divided on this title. I remember back in the day this putting me off from Hitman for a while until I was given a free code for World of Assassination. So with that said, is Hitman Absolution really deserving of the black sheep label? So when you start the game, you can pick one of 5 difficulties. As I always do in my reviews, we will be playing on the normal difficulty. It starts off with Agent 47 being given a mission to kill his longtime handler Diana by the agency. The first level serves as a tutorial on how to handle various situations and the controls. But before we get onto gameplay, I would like to first focus on the story. Compared to Hitman titles prior and after, there are far more cutscenes present this time around. The story is given far more of a focus and even differs radically from prior games' tone. Compared to the prior and even the World of Assassination trilogy, Absolution is absolutely more stylized. Watching these cutscenes have a John Woo inspired grindhouse tone to them. Everything is completely over the top and ridiculous, which is jarring considering how grounded the series normally is. Personally, I appreciate the attempt to try something new here. I like seeing a more vulnerable and gritty Agent 47, especially when the stakes are much more personal this time around. Unfortunately, Absolution goes way too far in the grindhouse direction, where it becomes rather goofy despite the stakes. The other problem I have is the story kinda sucks. We get introduced to characters that seem like they will have a big deal only for them to be quickly killed off. The villains are also just plain goofy and lack any real depth. There's also the cliche of Agent 47 being able to be killed by a villain, but somehow still gets out of the situation fine. It really just doesn't know if it wants the player to take the story seriously or shut off our brains. Despite the poor execution of the story, the cast still does an excellent job here. David Bateson once again returns as the voice of Agent 47 and delivers a very excellent performance. He is so synonymous with the character at this point that not having him will be sacrilege. Funnily enough, he was initially going to be replaced with William Lafleur until fan backlash reinstated him in. Thankfully, Bateson continues to be the voice to this day, which is much appreciated. Okay, so let's get to another radical departure from Hitman, and that is the gameplay. The first thing you'll realize is how much more linear each level is. Instead of being given a target and using a sandbox environment to execute the kill, you will mostly be moving from exit to exit, trying to get to the next part of the level. Neither Hitman games before or since have went this linear corridor route ever again, and for good reason. Not only are these levels incredibly linear, but they are also incredibly small with not a lot of options to pursue. Most of the time you'll have one very obvious direct route to take and one alternative stealth route to discover and use. Now, that's not to say every level is like this. On occasion, you have a mission where you'll need to take out a target and can get a bit creative here. There's always the very simple but effective silent bullet to the temple, or other ways depending on how the level proceeds. Sometimes waiting it out can open opportunities for you to take advantage of. This involves the use of an environmental object or even creating your own distractions by throwing an object. However, things might not go as you expect, meaning you'll need to waste enemies with well-placed shots. Thanks to the new cover system, it is much easier to get into a firefight and survive. As expected, Agent 47 has his legendary silver ballers to use, although some levels will not have these available due to story reasons. Fun fact, this is the final Hitman game to feature the twin silver ballers as Agent 47's main weapon. Dual wielding has not been featured in any main Hitman game since, which is a shame given the fun I had using them here. Regardless of the more action focus, Hitman Absolution is ultimately a stealth game despite the changes to the tone and overall presentation. Playing through the game is where you'll see many elements being expanded on in later games. For example, you can throw a sharp object to kill an enemy such as a screwdriver or a knife. This was eventually expanded in further games where you can now throw a hammer or some type of blunt object to just knock them out. Honestly, the stealth would be fine if it wasn't for the terrible disguise system. Disguises in Hitman are synonymous with each title and what ultimately helps Hitman to stand out from other stealth franchises. When you put on a disguise, you are able to blend in to avoid attention and possibly gain access to restricted areas. However, most of the disguises are useless for one simple reason. Anyone wearing the same uniform or set of clothes will recognize you that you don't belong here. The only way this can be avoided is using the instinct meter, which is a mechanic that only appears in Absolution. This makes Agent 47 awkwardly cover his face from suspicious NPCs. How NPCs buy this, I have no idea. It looks goofy and is just a silly mechanic, especially since gaining instinct is a manual process involving completing objectives and stealthily taking out enemies. I'm glad this system was scrapped as it was a bad idea and horribly implemented. What I also find strange is the score system. As you progress through an area, you're given a score based on completing objectives and how much stealth you used. In practice, you get points deducted anytime you take out a target, whether or not you've done it lethally or non-lethally. The only way to regain the point is to dump the body somewhere, either in a box or off a cliff. It's a bit silly to me considering that most of the missions have nothing to do with Hitman following a strict code of a contract. He's fighting for his life on many of them, so it doesn't make too much sense for stealth kills to be penalized on armed non-targets. And the score here is actually important as it helps you to unlock new passive abilities during your playthrough. This includes having more instinct as well as being able to run at a faster speed. Most of these won't radically change your playstyle, but it can help get you through the game easier. According to howlongtobeat.com, Hitman Absolution should take you about 12.5 hours to complete. That sounds like a pretty good length, although I found Hitman Absolution to be a far shorter game from abusing the instinct mechanic. My playthrough took 7.5 hours for me to complete, and this was without rushing through the levels and just playing them normally. I can see the 12.5 hour time if you're going for a silent assassin run, but that's personally never been the way I play. I play with a stealth first mentality as expected, but I don't mind having to get into a gunfight if things get sloppy. The bigger problem for the length is really the lack of replay value. Sure, you can always go back and try to get perfect runs, but the imagination needed isn't really that high. Since the levels are so small, it's pretty easy to grasp what the best route is that should be taken. Loadouts are no longer a thing, so you'll always start with the same weapons and items every time you start a level. You don't even have the ability to carry weapons from one level to another, meaning certain weapons are very limited in their use cases. There also aren't any side missions to find like World of Assassination, so you'll be stuck doing the same missions over and over again. I'm going to wrap this up soon, but there are a few comments I would like to make on the presentation. Visually, the John Woo Grindhouse influence is definitely felt in the character designs. Personally, I always found it hard to get back into the 7th gen of gaming, due to all the smearing and dull color palette that was way too common in this era. I'm also not a fan of Agent 47's design as his face just looks too big and too muscular. He looks too much like a meathead. It's very hard to explain, but as you see it in the cutscenes, you'll understand. From a music perspective, this game gets a lot of flack as Jesper Kyd did not return to compose this game. Considering how much he helped to set the tone with his amazing work on the prior titles, his departure is certainly felt. However, I didn't feel the soundtrack to be horrible in any way. There are several decent pieces that add to the grindhouse nature of Absolution. Overall, Hitman Absolution is a solid game, but not one that I see myself coming back to anytime soon. For the positives, the gunplay and cover system is excellent, the new additions to stealth are appreciated, and the missions that include a target are enjoyable. With that said, there are numerous negatives to consider, such as the overly linear level design, the repetitive mission structure, the nonsensical story, the poorly designed disguise system, and the lack of replay value. Still, I was able to complete this and enjoy a different take to what we are used to from Agent 47. Hitman Absolution is usually sold at $20, but can go on to sale for up to 90% off, bringing the price to $2. I can't really recommend at the full $20, but at $2, that's a ridiculous steal. Either way, thank you all for watching this review, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.